My name's Adrian Hunt. I'm the Executive Director of the Flying Heritage and Combat Armor Museum. And you are privileged people. You're going to get to see and hear about a magnificent plane. And this is a very important project that we've been working on for a long time. More than 15 years, not that we're counting. And this was a very important project to our founder and benefactor, Paul G. Allen, who unfortunately we lost last October. And he was very excited and followed this daily as to how far along it was. And it's also very important to the museum and to everything we do. And so why is it so important? Well, this is such a important aircraft. It's historically important in terms of technology. It's the first production jet aircraft that went into operation. It there were two kind of styles of jet engines back in the 40s. The Allies had this big, enormous, round, centrifugal idea about how to do jet engines. And the Germans had this axial flow model, and that's the one that won out. So the Allied kind of jet story was the Neanderthal side chute, and this is the main core that gave rise to modern jet flight. In terms of military history, it was very important because it was the first jet fighter. And there's a lot of mythology around it, and how it had been around a little earlier, which saved the Third Reich. The Third Reich and the Empire of Japan took on the United States, the Soviet Union, and the British Empire. So they were totally out by order of magnitude. Their industrial production and their population meant that there was no way they were going to win, but certainly it could have protracted the suffering of the Allies and other people. But so that's important. It's also important because of its rarity. So if you go online, you go to Wikipedia, they'll tell you there are like 11 Me-262s. Well, one of them's at the Luftwaffe Museum, and it's a few crash bits and a bit of duct tape and some baling wire, so that isn't down. So we're down to 10. 2 of them are in the Czech Republic, and they are remainders from the 12 that the Czechs made after the war, so they don't count. So what are we down to now? We're down to 9. And 8 of those are in national collections. They're in the RAF Museum, they're in Pensacola, they're the Smithsonian, the South African War Museum. They're basically in national collections. There is only one in private hands, and that is this one. And this is the only one that will ever fly. We're going to hear a lot about that. And that's very important to us because Mr. Allen's dream for aircraft and for the military vehicles was that we would restore things to absolute original perfection, and then we would operate them. And with only the most minor accommodations to safety in the FAA, these planes that we fly are original. And we're extremely proud of that. There are many planes, for example, 262s. There was a company that made in Everett that made replica 262s. It's totally fine if you're happy to have a replica 262, but it's not original. It's not got original engines. It worked originally, fly originally. We always want the most original. So we have the first IL-2 Sturmovik that ever flew. Now there's one other. We have the first Focke-Wulf 190 that ever flew, and probably the only real one that will ever fly. Because again, there's a company that made replica 190s, and so it grieves me tremendously to pick up aviation magazines to hear that there's another 190 at an air show, and it's not. It's a German kit usually with a Russian engine. It's not the real thing. We are into the real thing, every rivet, every piece, and so that's why it's very important to us that this is a real 262. We're the only collection in the world who does this obsessive attention to detail and originality. And then there is the technological challenge. People told Paul to his face, and people told me to my face, and probably all of us sitting here, that this was totally impossible to fly a 262 with its original engine. We need some accommodations, which you'll hear about, but essentially it's a real 262 with the original Jumo 004 engine. So Paul didn't think like that. It's amazing being around him for so long because he didn't think about constraints and anything that was possible. He dreamed. He was the idea man. What's the dream? I want private space flight. I want to solve the problems of brain science. Whatever it was, he never thought, oh, we can't do that. We're not even going to try. He'd be like, let's try and do that. How are we going to approach that problem? And so that's what we do, and that's what we thought from the beginning. And so all those naysayers who said it's impossible, it's crazy, it's dangerous, whatever, well, here it is. And so, for all those reasons, we're very proud and excited about this project. It's unfortunate that Mr. Allen's not going to see it fly, but he was so involved for so many years, it gave him so much pleasure. And we're here, we're fulfilling his dream. Now, just a final point, a lot of people are saying, well, your benefactor went away, what's going to happen? He's going to close your doors. Well, does this look like we're closing our doors? He had a dream, we have a dream, and we're going to continue that. And the Flying Heritage and Combat Arms Museum is going to complete this, fly this year. No pressure, right? This year. And then next year we're going to fly a Stuka. Are we fulfilling the dream? Yes, we are. So we're not going anywhere. We may do things a little differently. So now, for the show, I'll pass you first to Jason Mazzala, who is the Senior Manager in charge of Restoration and Maintenance at the Flying Heritage and Combat Armor Museum.
Thanks, Adrian. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of our fan bases here, and I appreciate that. Y'all hear me okay in the back? Yeah. Okay. Also ran into a gentleman who came all the way from Wisconsin to be here today, and so thank you to everybody for showing up. We really appreciate it. I'll go over a brief kind of overview of the program today, so you all know what to expect. There's tons of questions out there, and I realize that, and we'll get to those. We'll have a section for that. So if you have questions at any point, just hold tight. We'll get to it. I'd like to introduce you to these two gentlemen. This is Steve Hinton to my right. Steve will be part of the Q&A a little bit later on. He's our test pilot, and also Steve and his company, Frederick Builders, are here helping with the final phase. And next to Steve is Tim Morgan. Tim, as owner-operator of Morgan Aircraft, was the final step in restoration before this point, final assembly, and he's located actually just in the hangars behind you, so more on that later. The basic overview of the program, I'll go through the history of the airplane briefly, and then the restoration details, both for the airframe and the engines. Steve, we'll take a little break after that, and then we'll have Steve talk about test flying this airplane and other airplanes, just test flights in general. He's very experienced in that field, so he'll say a few things about that, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A for all three of us, and to answer any questions you guys have. At that point, and I would say probably after a lot of the questions are fielded, there's another photo opportunity for you guys to come get any photos you haven't gotten so far. Some of you just rolled in so you can get close-ups of the airplane. A couple ground rules: please don't touch the airplane. I know it goes without saying, and you're all airplane people, so you understand and respect that, and that's good. But again, just please don't touch the airplane. Be careful on the ladder, and then lastly, when we open the stairs, we'll actually let you get up one person at a time, and it may take time, but just due to the hazards of it, we only want one person on the wing at a time. You can go up the front of the airplane, look in the cockpit, take some shots if you want. Try not to spend a ton of time there because we have a couple 250 people here, and then exit the back of the aircraft. When you climb the stairs, there is the slats. As you guys notice, the wings have slats on them, and there are slats right by the stairs. Please do not step on those slats. They're fragile. We have it taped off. It's written no step, so just step over that. Basic rule of thumb is just stay on the black padding that we have down there. Don't step on the paint. So only ground rules for today. Everything else is fair game. We'll try and get through this and not talk too much so you can get to the airplane, because really that's what it's all about, right? Is get to look at the airplane. And I get that. As I mentioned, it's a sneak peek, as it says on the slide. It's a sneak peek. So I'll go through the history, like I said, engine restoration, airframe restoration, but we're not going to dive. I'm going to try and keep it a little high level. As Adrian said, we've been restoring this for a number of years, and so to get down to the nitty-gritty of the restoration, there's just not enough hours in a day or days in the week to really cover what it's taken to get this airplane to this point. But I'll try and abbreviate that, get you up to speed, where we're at now, where we're going to go in the future, about test flights. I know everybody has questions about that. So it is just a sneak peek. And before I dive in, lastly, I just want to mention how lucky you guys are to be here. This is exactly what it is. It's a sneak peek. You guys get to be here and see the airplane, look at it up close, look at the details. And the next time that the public, outside of all of you in this room, are going to have a chance to do that is after we've test flown the airplane and it's on display at Flying Heritage. So it's a really, really neat opportunity that we all have here. It's kind of special that we all came together. So anyhow, let me see if I can figure out how to work the computer. Airplanes, building and flying are one thing, but computers, that's the way I think about it. Or turn the on button to the on. Step one. Okay, so this aircraft was built in March of 1945 near Regensburg. It was test flown once, and then it was modified with the recon nose, so it had cameras in the nose. This is not this aircraft. This is an aircraft that is from the same group. And the reason I have that slide up there is to show you what the airplanes, once they got to this group, were painted like. And as you can see, the way we do restorations at Flying Heritage is to exactly measure. So that's just an example of a different airplane. This airplane, after it got modified with the camera nose, it joined the Luftwaffe NAG-6 in left field, and it was marked which you can see in the slide, and you can see on the airplane right behind me. And it operated as a short-range reconnaissance plane with that group until the end of the war. After VE Day, let me back up one. After VE Day, this airplane was discovered with others in the group, and it was being ferried. This and the other aircraft were all ferried over to France. It fell under the control of the 54th Air Disarmament Squadron, or the ADS. And while still in Germany, the Master Sergeant of the ADS painted the first version of nose art on this aircraft. It had different kind of lives throughout its career. And the first one was what that says there, if you could look closely, is Connie the Sharp Article. And that was inspired from his wife. So that's how it sat in Germany, and that's how it was how it looked when it flew from Germany to France. It was flown to France by one of the men that became part of Watson's Wizards. This is a picture of this airplane with Colonel Watson and some others. They actually eventually got the airplane. Once it got to France, it was flown there by gentleman Lloyd Brown, who was actually able to come see this airplane and look at it configured this way. Lloyd didn't like Connie the Sharp Article because it was about somebody else's life on the nose of the airplane, so he made it his own, and he named this airplane PIC-2. So yeah, P-I-C-K with Romeo 2. PIC is inspired by his wife's maiden name, Pickerel, and Roy Brown flew a T-47 Thunderbolt during the war, and his nose art was PIC for the same reason. So this airplane naturally became Big 2. Once it was in France, they got it ready, and they loaded it on the HMS Reaper with about 40 other airplanes to eventually make its way over to the United States. On the HMS Reaper, which, by the way, that boat was built in Tacoma, just south of here, so kind of a small world. So the airplane was put on the HMS Reaper, sent over here, and interestingly, and you know, a lot of the airplanes, a lot of the old German airplanes in this country kind of came over with that same lot, were used for several different things, one of which that was on that boat with the Me-262 was Flying Heritage and Combat Armor. Boy, that's a mouthful. FHM's Focke-Wulf 190 D13. So the door that sits in our museum down in Everett was actually on the same boat as the Me-262 you see behind it. So kind of an interesting little tidbit there. The airplane, once it got to the United States, eventually made its way over to Wright Field. It was flown by Colonel Watson himself. He flew this aircraft, and one of his crew members, one of the Wizards, was flying another 262, and they were taking it from New Jersey to Wright Field. It wound up starting a two-ship and then wound up as a single ship, and that was because of brakes, and you'll hear a little bit about those later. They both had kind of some issues with the brakes. This airplane got stopped in time, the other airplane didn't, went off the runway, and the airplane was lost, and the pilot was okay. So Colonel Watson carried on with this aircraft and got to the base where they were doing a lot of testing. So after the war, our military would test a lot of the foreign, mostly German aircraft for various reasons, and of course the Me-262 being so advanced for its time was one of those airplanes. This airplane was tested against the P-80 Shooting Star, and that's an important airplane to remember kind of later on in the story. So they flew this airplane, I think maybe like just over 4 hours. Is that better? Oh yeah. Well, I don't have to talk as hard either. It's nice. So they flew this airplane just over 4 hours before they decided they were done with the testing. At that point, the airplane went on loan to the Hughes Aircraft Company that obviously Howard Hughes was in charge of. And he was, I guess, going to study it was the story, and that was in late 46. So the last time the airplane flew was in late 46, transferred to Howard Hughes. And he didn't do too much with it. It was used in a film, John Wayne film, Jet Pilot, not flying, obviously, but it was in the film. And then it was transferred to a technical college after that. When Howard Hughes had it, there's rumors, I don't think anybody has confirmed, but the rumor is that he was interested in entering it in the Thompson Trophy race. However, he was strongly discouraged from doing that, apparently from the military, because they were entering their P-80 Shooting Star. So, I think maybe they knew what would happen. This is a shot of the airplane as Pick 2, when backing up just a little bit, when the Watson Wizards had it. It was, yeah, just glad that's not me. It was given the designation FE 4012, and that's a number that stuck with the airplane for the rest of its life, and it's still attached to the airplane now, FE 4012. So this is the aircraft as Pick 2. Another shot of the airplane after it had been painted over. They, of course, had to paint over all of the German military markings when they flew it in France, but I think some of them wound up back on the airplane. Here's a rendition of Pick 2. The photos are kind of hard to see what the nose are. At the end of this, when we get into the Q&A, I'll put this PowerPoint on a loop. So some of these, if I'm going kind of fast or you want to get close-ups with your camera, it'll be on a loop, so you guys will be able to see those later. So this is pick 2. They've got the swastika painted over on the tail, obviously, and the star and bar on the side, and so this is what it would have looked like after it got to France, and then all the way to Renfield. So after the technical college, entered the Plains of Fame, and kind of the next phase of its life, a really long phase, probably I'd say the longest of its life was with the Plains of Fame. Ed Maloney acquired the airplane around 1955, I believe, and it stuck with the museum with over a few different moves. I think it started in Claremont, and then it was moved to Ontario, and then finally Chino. And some of these photos, Steve, who's been involved in the Plains of Fame, not quite since 1955, but quite a long time. Quite a long time, can probably speak to where these photos are and what was going on. And when we talk about Plains of Fame and these different displays, Steve, as a very young man, had a lot to do with these, and helped paint the airplane, helped move it, and so the personal connection that Steve has with the airplane goes back a lot of years, and to these photos that you see here. At Plains of Fame, it wound up as White 9. Not accurate to what the airplane actually was, but it was a great paint scheme, and it looked really well. This is how I remember the airplane. When I was young, I spent a lot of time at the Chino airport. My dad was also involved with the Plains of Fame, and so when he would be at the airport, I would get to go climb all over the airplanes and jets and just kind of run them up, really. And this airplane was always fascinating, and this is kind of how I would remember it. Never putting thought into myself that I would be able to be involved and make it fly one day. It was not something I could have even imagined. I don't know much about this photo, but this is at the Plains of Fame, and famed German ace Adolf Galland visited and was able to sit in the airplane. So that's a photo we have on file. I thought was pretty amazing, and just kind of wonder what was going on in his mind at the time. And so yeah, it was at the Plains of Fame until the year 2000, and that's when Flying Heritage acquired the airplane and started our long, so far, I guess 19-year journey. All of that So I'll dive into the restoration kind of overview, and like I mentioned earlier, I won't get too deep. There's some pretty good juicy photos in here, and I'll explain some of the stuff, but I think you'll be happy with it. It will cover quite a bit, and then we're definitely happy to answer any questions. So if you do have the kind of specific questions, we can answer those at the end. Basically, you have airframe and engines. The engines were overhauled at Aero Turbine in Stockton, California. They're jet engine experts. They've done vintage jet engines for years and years, and they really know their stuff. And the engine restoration, I would have to say, was probably more complex and challenging than the airframe restoration. The airframe was actually in really good shape, as you can see here. A lot of the metal and the structure on the airframe was still good, which kind of sets this airplane apart from others, that were found corroded or in bad shape. This airplane was in a good environment in Chino for a lot of years, and the airframe was actually in really, really good shape. So not only do we have the only privately owned and restored and soon to be operable Me-262, but it's the actual airframe. So when you look at the wings and the fuselage, it's the exact wings and fuselage that flew, on reconnaissance missions over Germany, and you don't get that with a lot of restorations these days. The restoration work started in the UK with a company. That's where most of the structural work was done. spent a short while in Casa Grande, Arizona, and then it wound up here in Arlington with Morgan Aircraft, who did all the final assembly, hashed out all the bugs with the systems, installed all the systems, solved a lot of the mysteries and issues we've come up with against at that point. And of course, put this fabulous paint job on it. So that brings us to where we're at now. So currently we have Steve's company, Fighter Rebuilders. So Steve and a couple of his guys are here, as well as Flying Heritage. We have a full-time guy here as well. And Tim is also still highly active in finishing it out, as well as Aero Turbine. So they'll send guys over to help support us with the engine runs and taxi tests and so on. So it's really kind of a big group effort. That's all taking place right here. The brief plan is we're going to test run the engines. We're going to certify it with the FAA. We're going to take the aircraft to Moses Lake, where there's a lot longer runways, several long runway options, and a lot of kind of security type areas around the airport. It's just more conducive to test flying. So that's the plan. Again, it's not going to be open to the public. That's not the type of thing that you really want to crowd at. It's going to be kind of closed. It's going to be safe. Safety is our number one priority. So that's kind of where we're at and kind of where we're going. Before I get into some more of the restoration type photos and a couple of the details, I want to introduce a few people. Of course, you met Tim Morgan, who was involved, so I don't have to introduce him or Steve, but Greg Ice, who's here, he's right here. He's Flying Heritage's lead mechanic. Mel Johnson, right here. Go ahead and wave. There you go. Mel's up here working with Steve and Fighter Rebuilders. And then, last but not least, Jim Dale is... Where is Jim Dale? Here he is at the blue stand. Yeah, right there. So these guys are doing a terrific job. These are the guys that are here every day, all day long. They're grinding out all of the issues and squawks and the mysteries, and it's one thing to restore an airframe, and then quite another to restore an engine. But then when you marry those two together, it's not as easy as just plug and play. And these guys are here every day, getting after it, figuring this out, and making it happen. As well as Steve and Tim. I'm not trying to say they're not, but these guys are, they're not up here in front of the table, but definitely the driving force. So again, maybe just a hand for these guys. So we'll start with the airframe. We'll save the engines for last before we go on break. As I mentioned, and you can see in the slides, the airframe was pretty well intact and in really good shape. Here's some shots of it going together in various locations. Anything that was, you can see the cowling framework, anything that was steel had to be rebuilt because of corrosion, just due to the corrosion. But as you can see here, this fairing that this guy's pointing at, that's aluminum, that's original, and that's being used and put back on the airplane. So a lot of stuff was taken apart to inspect, verified that it was in good shape, and put right back on the airplane. One of which, well, I should mention, so exactly details. So here's some writing that was found during the restoration. Any kind of notes or messages in writing got put back so that it looks exactly the way it did out of the factory during World War II. Some of which we preserved because we couldn't recreate. So this is a note inside the tail area on a skin that was written in French, and it was discovered during the restoration process. We were able to preserve it and wanted to leave it We tried to translate it. This is basically what we could decipher in French, just because of the where. And then the translation is something about the holes, and this is needed, and warning, and glue. And so what we can assume is that it was one factory worker passing on some production notes to another factory worker. What it says, we're not sure, but the fact that it was in French kind of, I don't know if it answers anything, but maybe makes me ask more questions about the people building the airplane and kind of where they were at. So we preserved it and we put it right back on the airplane. So the airplane will fly around with the original factory workers' notes. Nose section here, again, anything that kind of involves steel, we went ahead and remade. Tim will be able to speak to that later. The field doors, which I have some pictures of, and the cowlings, we had to make new. Shot of the cockpit, you all get to see that for yourselves. So. We decided to keep the gun nose on it. That's something that Paul wanted, and so of course, rather than just put some models of Mark 108 cannon in there, we acquired 4 Mark 108 cannons and we restored them. And so there are the guns that you see here behind me are not operable because that wouldn't be legal, but they are very close and probably could be operable Mark 108 cannons in those gear. Shot a landing gear there. Everything has to be gone through. Just kind of a big beefy gear. The size of it is kind of telling. And then brake parts. So if you're going to make one of something, you might as well make a lot. And so this is some of the work that Tim did. And these are brake parts made out of a modern alloy that we know are going to withstand anything the airplane's going to put it through. And there's certain things that safety kind of trumps originality. And for a functioning airplane, you have to make those hard decisions sometimes. You have to cut out the originality and replace it with something safe, just to keep, to preserve the airplane. Because what's the point if you go out and the things that you know are going to fail or did fail in the past, well, they're not going to suddenly improve in design or operation. So we made some stuff modern. The fuel pump system is another. Germans have a pretty clever fuel pump system, but not quite as reliable as you'd want to be with a jet so rare as this. So it's got modern fuel pumps in it, modern brake material, and then of course the engine has modern materials as well. We'll get there. Hopefully that'll answer some questions like, hey, you can go fly with the old brakes, that failed. You just mentioned that one of 2 airplanes went off the end of the runway trying to get this to the test facility. So the answer is no. All of those issues we know about. We have the flight records, we have the logbooks for this airplane. We know the problems they encountered testing all of the Me-262s after the war, not just this one. So we've really tried to get out ahead of that and make it a safe, reliable airplane. Just kind of a fun photo. It's the substitute landing gear. So when they didn't, it's just a gear swing. So these are the field doors. So if you guys look underneath the airplane, it's clear in this photo, and I just wanted to show that the red primer there is all the steel portion of it, and so that's what supports the fuel tank, and it's ribbed for a reason. That's all spot welded together, and the ribs basically created like a road map. Is that how you describe it, Tim? Like a road map. So when you're on the other side, how do you connect the spot welder together, and how do you know where you're supposed to be? So they intentionally kind of had it dented so that people on both sides would know exactly where they were at to make the spot welds good. So when you look under this airplane, we could have made it smooth with modern technology and not being in a hurry and in the middle of war. We could have made it smooth, but that's not how they did it in the factory. So Tim, dented it all up. Brand new metal, but it's dented because that's the way that it was. Another shot of it being repaired there. Yeah, onto engines. So the engines, they raise the most questions. So inevitably, when I mention, yeah, well, we have an Me-262 we're restoring, or people say, hey, how's the Me-262 project going? The first thing they ask about is the engines. What engines are you going to use? How are you going to operate original engines once they hear that we're operating Jumo 004 engines, one of which is actually original to this airplane after the flight testing, and they say, no way, and then after I say, yes way, how are you going to do that? So there's lots of questions surrounding the engines, and while we don't have necessarily the engine experts or rebuilders here, we know a decent amount about, quite a bit, so we can answer a lot of questions, but maybe not all of them. So, did we have materials? Yeah, we had some materials. We had manuals and drawings and I guess test notes, flow charts. We had a lot of materials, but we didn't have all of them, and that was one of the challenges of overhauling the engines. Was like performance diagrams for the accessories, for example. We knew what the engines were doing. We know what the engine performance is supposed to be, but when you take apart like the oil motor or the governor, which is part of the fuel delivery system, where do you set those on the test bench? What are those parameters? And those are questions that we didn't have answers for a very long time. Yeah, a couple engine shots. See, there's the turbo wheel in the back there. That's new. So number one question is, what are you doing about the bad metallurgy? So we heard the engines had a very short life, and it was because of the metal that was used in the engines. Well, that's absolutely correct. The metallurgy wasn't up to par. And so our answer to that was, we're going to make the exact same engine with the exact same drawings to the same specifications, but with a modern metal. It's a modern Hastelloy metal. So everything in the combustion section, or hot section, if you will, has been rebuilt with modern metals. Same metal that they're building the J85s with. And how do we know that? Because the folks at Aero Turbine have the contract to rebuild the J85s for the military. So they know quite a bit about J85s and the service life of the metal and what holds up. So there was an extreme amount of research and thought that went into how do we make these engines reliable. After research, they determined that the engines should be good for 300 plus hours as opposed to the 25. We're not gonna license it that way. We certainly, as all of you know, we're never gonna put 300 plus hours on the airplane. It's highly unlikely, but somebody might. Eventually, maybe we continue to fly and we could do it. That's the confidence we have in the engines. This is kind of interesting. The turbine wheel there, the way they put that together with all the notes, it was just really tedious. There's actually air that flows through each one of those blades to help cool it. Not a completely foreign concept, but at the time, considering it's the first produced jet engine, it was pretty advanced. Another shot of that being built there. Air flows through the exhaust cone, so they had kind of dissected an exhaust cone to figure out what's going on inside there. So there's a shot of that. And then, so this is an oil motor, so this actually controls the thrust needle. So there's two kind of main components in the fuel delivery system. There's a governor, which your power lever controls, and that speaks to the oil motor, which then in turn drives the thrust needle in the back of the engine without going too deep into it. So to overhaul an oil motor is challenging. One, because as you can see, the parts they're worn. They've been sitting around for decades, and you have to clean them up. They have to meet the tolerances to meet the the specifications. And what makes that difficult is the same thing that makes restoring one of these engines difficult. Like most of our projects with unique engines, we have to buy several to build one. For example, we just recently received a Jumo 211 for a JU-87 Stuka, and it took like 8 engines to build one operable Jumo 211. Well, the Jumo 004s are no different in that we had to collect a lot. The main difference is that because of the technology at the time, everything was match built for its own component. In other words, this piston that you see in the slide here is marked 670. So the oil motor that you saw soaking in the bucket is marked 670. That's the serial number of that component. So all of these parts inside the oil motor are all serial numbered 670 because they've all been match fit to that oil motor. There's another piece, 670. So all the parts inside there say that, which means you can't take an oil motor off a different engine or a different shelf and grab that piece and expect that it's going to be the same. It's not apples and apples. They're the same unit, but you may have to modify or rebuild a part because you can't just take a piston out of one oil motor and put it into another. And that was really challenging. Just some fun shots there. Another challenge to building the Jumo 004s was that we tested these engines well beyond the 25-hour service life of the engine. So where we changed the metallurgy and made the engine reliable and operated it well through to a reliable number of hours that we're comfortable with, the issues we started having were the sort of ancillaries or the accessories on the engine, because those engines, when they get removed as a pack, they go away, everything gets overhauled, they get new components, and then they would come back. Well, we ran them past their kind of expected life, so there was no manual for that. There's no troubleshooting guide to how do you fix the oil motor or the governor or any of these other kind of components. And so the more we operated the engine, the more squawks that we had to encounter and overcome that had never been faced before. The German military never had to figure out how do you fix a governor after 35 hours, because they didn't run them over 35 hours. They got a new engine and they got a new governor. So that's just kind of one of the sort of hurdles that we didn't expect. We didn't. You can't think of everything. You can think of a lot, but you just can't think of everything. And nobody thought, hey, maybe we should get started on the accessories and operate those on a bench and see what happens at 30, 40, or 50 hours. We thought, well, it's an accessory, it's good. If not, we can get a new one. Well, surprise, they're all serial numbered, and you can't just swap parts to put them in there. So it was definitely interesting at times and brought its own challenges. But the guys at Aeroturbine were able to overcome those. That's a shot of the starter motor. On this airplane, we have the nose cone off the right side, so you can actually see that starter motor in there. And on the left side, the cone's still on, so that's how that would have been, and that's how it'll fly, is the way the left side sits now. You'll notice a little, just so we don't have to answer this question, there is a little handle on the nose cone there, and this little two-stroke like lawnmower engine is what starts the jet engine. And Steve might be able to go through the start process. It's extremely unique on this airplane. It's not like any other airplane. But it begins with starting this little lawnmower type engine, which then spins the jet engine, and then you introduce some fuels, and it gets all funny, and it's just kind of this neat thing that takes place. But it all starts with a little lawnmower engine. And so the handle on the front, if your electrical system isn't working, you can start it from the cockpit, but if you can't, well, then it's a pull start, just like your lawnmower. You go to the engine, and you rip on it, and you start it up that way. Just another kind of unique thing. I'll fish through some through some slides here and kind of wrap this up. So this is the transition duct, they call it. Lots of research done at the facility. This is done at Danville Metals in Illinois. They make a lot of jet engine components, and so we called upon them to do that. A lot of testing to form that part, as you can imagine, will be extremely difficult. And it all kind of comes together. So there's kind of the pieces that it would take. Making even just kind of the small skins for that was very difficult. You're taking a very hardy metal and trying to make it do things that really metal shouldn't do. But they were able to do it. The size and complexity of the tooling was pretty incredible that they used to get that done. Again, another shot of the tooling. And let's see, I got a lot of these. So, yep, there's a hydroform press, so I'm not sure exactly how many thousands of pounds that puts out, but that's one of the only hydroform presses in the country that will produce that piece on the right there, which is still part of the transition duct. The transition duct's important because after you create the combustion in the burner cans, which we have an example of on the table over there, it goes through the duct into the exit there, so it kind of funnels all of the thrust, so to speak. And then there it is, all finished product, ready to go. Once it's all done and put together, then they go through and they check for tolerances. Every hole and is checked with this machine, and that machine talks to the computer. So there's a hole that's 1,000 off, then they don't accept it. So they went through a pretty rigorous process just to make one piece. That's just one piece in the engine, and there's several that make that kind of different view of it there. So that's the engine assembly there, kind of on the test cell. That's the test cell they actually use to test run the engines. Those engines are on and off the cell. I don't know how many times. You test run the engine, has a leak internally, and because of the nature of the engine, they weren't built to be worked on. They were built to be replaced, right? They were 25 hours. So the German manual actually says you can operate them 25 hours, and if there's no major squawks or issues, then you could extend that 10 hours to 35 hours. But under no circumstance were you to operate it over 35 hours. So that was the mentality. So when we would encounter a squawk at Aero Turbine, like, hey, it's leaking at this seal, or we have to do this, that means we'd have to take it off the cell, disassemble the engine, repair whatever we had to repair, reassemble the engine, put it back on the test cell, and then give it another go. There it is outside there. And there's one of the first test runs. And that's all somewhat normal. If you watch the old videos, you can see flame coming out the back. And that's kind of normal. It just burns out. It's just extra fuel before it lights up, kind of collects in the exhaust there. Then once the engine does light up, it just burns out. So during the starts, when we display the airplane at the museum, you may or may not get a view of that. If Steve's doing things right, then maybe you won't. And there's Steve and Doug Clayton. So Doug is the owner-operator of Aero Turbine, and he's the one that facilitated the engines come together. So even though he couldn't make it, he wanted to be here, he couldn't make it, I just thought it would be great for you guys to be able to see him, see who he is, recognize him. He's done an amazing job on these extremely talented individuals. So I think that about does it for me. That's my quick version of Me-262 restoration. We can get into sort of the nuts and bolts and whatever you guys want in our Q&A session with Tim and Steve. Eventually, I think now we're going to have a short break, and then we'll come back and listen to Steve and then Q&A. Before that, Michael King, our education coordinator, has a few things for you. So thanks again for your time.
But at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Steve. As Jason mentioned, Steve is a really renowned pilot, and he'll be the test pilot for the Me-262. We're absolutely delighted that he's joined us for this program today. So how about a round of applause for Steve?
Thanks for all coming. It was really impressive to see the details of this airplane. Like Jason told you that, you know, I've been around the Planes Flight Museum since I was 7. So I've actually known this airplane a long time, and I've logged lots of hours in the pilot seat. As a young man, and with my buddy Jim Maloney growing up, we actually painted this thing a couple times ourselves. As a matter of fact, one time we painted the whole nose. It was all steel with standard brand spray bombs, you know, they call them spray bombs, spray cans. So anyway, we got a lot of history with this airplane. I've had the opportunity to fly warbirds since I was about 19 years old, so, and have got a lot of hours in different airplanes, and I've made more than 50 first flights, but restored aircraft of all types, mainly on warbirds, I should say. So anyway, my formula is, for one thing, is I don't say yes to everybody. Pretty particular who I'm involved with. I also surround myself with guys like JD and Jason and Mel, and people that are smarter than I am at this stuff. When you're working at it. Also, I don't just show up to fly. I'm a mechanic and restored. I have a company that does this for a living. I get involved with every aspect of the airplane. So, what I've done along the line of being part of this project since day one is, just been involved in communicating with everybody who worked on the airplane. In England, I would snoop around it. I was thinking maybe someday I get to fly. So it's fun making that seat it grow. Now we're in the final stages. We're here to just kind of follow up and catch things. I wouldn't say catch things, but do the final adjustments. Tim's guys have done a fabulous job. This airplane, in detail, is there isn't a better restoration I've ever seen. It's amazing all the detail that they've gone through with, the right hardware, the right bearings, the look. It's incredible. You know why it's taken 19 years. It's one of the reasons. And so anyway, as far as the test flights are concerned, our mission isn't to try to see how fast it'll go or how aerobatic it'll be in any way. All we're going to do is make sure that we're all happy with it, how it functions on the ground, and then we'll just take it up and just get some reliability flights on it, understand, find some, how it operates, but we don't plan on doing any, going 500 miles an hour with it. I mean, there's nothing to prove, I get to fly an F-86 every once in a while, so I love going fast, but this is a piece of history. It's a one of a kind, so we'll be extra careful with it. And so the test flying is going to, it'll take probably 10, 15 flights really before we can really say that we'd be happy with it. I would assume that most of it's a reliability thing, making sure the engines are operating correctly. Jason alluded to like the starting procedure on these things. It's kind of very interesting. We talk about the early jets. When in my view of these engines, when we first talked about possibly flying with these engines, we left it to the experts for Aero Turbine. That was a big question to them right at the beginning. Now, how good do you think these engines really are? They, with all their experience with these different jet engines they've been doing, they say it's an outstanding design, but the metal was the issue. Germans used all the good metal on all their submarines and they used whatever's left. They could build, I think they said 6 of these engines with the same amount of manpower it would take to build one Focke-Wulf engine. So it was just a design fault, just to replace engines. It was by design. But anyway, by putting a new metallurgy and taking the time to upgrade the engine, we feel to be very reliable. But starting it, like he said, it was a little lawnmower engine with electric motor on it. And you prime it, you get it going, and actually we were spinning it up this morning. I don't know if Jason wants to do it for the fans here, but it makes a lot of noise. That little putt-putt takes off and it winds up the engine to 800 RPM. And then on the throttle, where you usually talk on the mic, on the radio, you press that and that gives you ignition, and then injects avgas. There's a separate tank in the bullet up in the nose there. And then the engine lights off on the avgas. And it slowly accelerates up to 2,000 RPM, at which time you shut the starter off, and then you actually open up the jet fuel to it as you advance to an idle stop. The engine runs at 3,000 RPM at idle. And it's very smooth. It sounds like a jet. The fuel coming out of the tailpipe, the picture that Jason showed there was early on, we were trying to figure out how to start the damn thing, really, because there was a lot of confusion about the way I just described by turning the kerosene on, and got a little bit out of sequence, because some manuals refer to it differently. It's hard to understand exactly, but that's the procedure on the test stand that we were using. And finally got to pretty good. It doesn't groan or moan if you do it right. The operation of the engine, high power, is sluggish and slow. You know, all you're doing as you advance the throttle is you're adding more fuel, but the engine has to accelerate. And once you get up about 7,000 to 7,500 RPM, that's when the engine really starts putting out some thrust. And then the needle in the back, when you walk around the back, you'll see a needle there. That's when the schedule starts, the fuel control starts scheduling that needle to reduce the size of the exit, to increase the thrust. And at about 8,000 RPM, it's extended enough where you can see it out of the cockpit. And at full throttle, 8,400 is maximum. And that's when, before takeoff check, early in the takeoff, we're got to make sure both elbows are out. As far as flying, reading the handbook, it was flown by a lot of pilots, a lot of very inexperienced pilots as well. And it's really fast. We had a pleasure of talking to Colonel Lamb the other day. He was a Thunderbolt pilot, just to give you a war story. He shot down a 262, but he talked about being at 15,000 feet, looking down and seeing the 262 below him. And he said he was in the D model, Thunderbolt. He said he went to full throttle with a water injection on, dove down on him, going about 500 miles an hour behind him. He said the guy was just pulling away from him, but the guy made a big mistake and made a turn. And he just happened to be close enough with 850s and got him. But talking with Bud Anderson, he was telling me the same story. He's a famous Mustang ace. And he said he was at about 15,000 feet and saw 262 below, big smoke trails behind it. And so he calls his wingman, he says, okay, follow me, I'm gonna roll over and drop my tanks. So he said he pushed the throttle all the way up, he rolled over, dropped his tanks, and the engine quit. Because he was selected to one of those tanks. There's a lot of these stories these guys will tell you too, it's pretty funny. And finally, when the engine finally quit overspeeding and caught up again, he was at full throttle, dove down behind it, got behind the 262, he said, all the thing did is just kind of disappeared, it just pulled straight ahead. So this was such an advanced airplane in its day, and thank goodness it fell under political control, because the Luftwaffe generals wanted to use it as a defensive weapon, and Hitler forbid it. It would be built as an offensive weapon, and there's no way it would be effective as a bomber. It just didn't carry enough fuel. But it's a very advanced machine, and it's a great looking airplane. Can't wait to bring it all back to life, and be part of this thing has been a real honor, and one of the things I've looked forward to my whole life, actually. So maybe in the next 4 or 5 months we'll be able to talk more about it. And I can answer any questions you have later.
Yeah, so I think we'll do the Q&A. How do you want to do this, Michael? Do we have a second mic, or should I just run out? Okay. I'll probably just ask you guys to speak loudly. Got it, yeah. And when you get a minute, if you could put the thing on the boot, I definitely don't know how to do that. Yeah, that's right. Just pull back on the stick, says the test pilot. Questions? Yeah, let's go through some questions right here. No, and I don't think that it's been a problem, actually. I'll let Steve answer that. So the question was, how do we overcome the design flaw of the throttle? There's some people have said if you basically slam the throttle or go full throttle, then it'll flame out and lose the engine. So here's the.
That is true, and there's really no remedy without redesigning the whole thing, so we just don't slam the throttles up. Because, I mean, early jet engines, you know, I fly with a lot of Air Force guys, and so these early, like the T-33 and whatever, and they just, you know, they want to slam the throttles up. You can't do that. You know, these engines aren't built for it, so you just have to be careful. Like I said, this is a relic. It's not a war machine anymore, so you know, we'll be really careful of it.
How many hours were involved in actually remanufacturing the engines, the engineering behind that? How many hours were spent jumping the engines?
Yeah, you know, at a certain point in time, you stop the head banging on the wall and you stop counting hours that you're putting into it. So it's more years is kind of the way we track it. It's not how long. It's not like how many hours or how much money am I putting towards it. It's you know, what's it going to take to get these engines together. And like Adrian started with, this was Paul's dream. So it of course was relevant, but you know, the mission was to complete operable Jumo 004 engines to fly the jet with. So we didn't calculate that. We don't have that answer. We've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. All the way in the back, stand in that.
Two questions. One, is there going to be a book detailing everything you've been talking about? And two, where in the world did they find 4 of those Mark 108s?
You know, I'm not sure if we're going to have a book detailing the restoration. We have been documenting each step with the engines and the airframe, and even recently on film. So there will be a film on the restoration and classified. Next question.
What's the serial number of the aircraft and where does that fall on the code?
I don't know where it falls in the production run. I think I'll come back to you with the serial number. The work number, interestingly, there's kind of some history there. Is it this airplane or that airplane because of the nose swap issue? And so it's tied to the airplane that's in the Smithsonian back there. And so there's kind of some question on that. But for all intents and purposes, as far as the FAA is concerned, it's the 4012 number. That's the actual serial number of the aircraft. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, how many, be a motor guy, my question goes to, how many engines do you have for the airplane at this point? Just the 2?
Operable, yes. Yeah, just the 2. All the way in the back.
What is the thrust of the engines approximately?
Published thrust is like 1,940 pounds or something, but Aeroturbine says it exceeds that. And I got a rating in one of those replica 262s, and we'd only use 93% when we were flying it because the J85s are a lot more powerful. It still gets up and goes pretty good with that much thrust.
And then in the back again.
Do we know what year Messerschmitt came up with the Swallow?
I think 41, the first flew in 41, right? Late 41? Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Black.
Jason, do you know the unit markings that you painted in? What unit it is?
Yeah, it's the NAG-6. It was a reconnaissance group.
No, I mean, that's the markings. It's in the reconnaissance markings. Belgium is a fighter.
It is, yeah. And it was the white 25. So they were all their numbers were white, right? And this airplane was airplane number 25. So yeah, they were white. So oftentimes, as you know, with the German groups, they had a color depending what they were with. So they were either like yellow 9 or white A, for example. Our Focke-Wulf 190 is white A. This airplane in the Luftwaffe was known as White 25, which is on the airplane. Next question. Yeah, go ahead.
What are you expecting the flight to happen to this aircraft?
Well, just based on what the test pilots reported, it flies pretty good. And it has some a lot of leverage with the engines under the wing, so power changes are make it pitchy. It's not great on one engine. It's got a lot of adverse yaw. But based on what I've read, it flies very good, easy to control, good stability at high speed, good rate of climb. Red line on it is it's 590 miles an hour indicated, so it's like a 0.8 Mach an airplane, it's maybe like a T-33. Think about it today, the wing slats, that's a pretty good design, how they work, gives it good slow speed handling characteristics.
Let's go in the back of the young man with the glasses.
With all the fuel limited at the end of the war, the Luftwaffe and all the junk that they were throwing into their fuel tanks to try and conserve that limited resource, did you run into any problems trying to rebuild the engine with that kind of stuff?
No, I don't think so. So the question was, because of the fuel shortage at the end of the war, the quality of fuel was not up to par, and so did we encounter any issues with the engines where we may have had a bad batch of fuel or something go through those? And no, we really didn't. As I mentioned before, we had several engines and had to use a lot of different components, but really nothing that indicated an issue because of bad fuel. Right here in the middle.
For Steve, what's the VMCA on the airplane?
I think Polish number is 160 miles an hour. And that replica that I flew, the rudder trim tab wasn't big enough, and I mean, it is the heaviest rudder I've ever felt, worse than a B-25.
There was a question earlier as we were getting ready for this that I'll let Steve answer, and it was the trim tab on the elevator out there is somebody noticed that it's tied off.
Sweden history books, they built it with a servo tab, and I guess it was too sensitive, so they disconnected it, but it's still there like it was. It's the whole tail trims on this thing too, turnable stabilizer like a lot of the German airplanes.
Yeah, almost all of the instruments are original, and of course they've all been inspected and calibrated, and that wasn't an easy task for the instrument shops either. I think we were talking about it the day before yesterday. We went through 8 vertical speed indicators before we found one that we could actually take enough parts out of all 8 of them to make one unit. So. The original radios are not being used. All of the equipment obviously has been restored and is in place, but not being used.
Additionally, the Germans didn't have 80 in speed. Let's see, right back here.
Back in the early years of did you ever talk to any individual pilots, guys who worked
With the 262, you mean operational? I never personally had a chance to say anything to any of them, but I was there. That one picture in the jet up on the screen was the Planes of Fame visiting their chief, and Ed Maloney, they were visiting Ed, at the airplane at the time.
Young man back.
What type of camera did they originally put in the nose
I don't know that we have a good answer on that. My guess would be like that.
Yeah. I'm not sure kind of what model number they were, but typically they had a couple of vertical cameras in there that they could bring on. We could probably find that answer out, but I don't have that one on top of my head. So, yeah, that's fine.
Speaking of cameras, I know there's a net camera. Do you have that? Is it going to be in place?
You know, I don't know if we have one of those. I think we do, don't we? Yeah, yeah, we have it, so it'll be in there. Yeah. All the way back there in the black shirt.
I'm not sure if I heard it or not, maybe I missed it, if it wasn't said, but do you know who the original pilot of this was?
Yeah, so this airplane had a couple different pilots. Lieutenant Roy Brown was the gentleman who flew it from southern Germany to France to get ready to be boarded on the HMS Freebird. And then once it docked in New Jersey, it was actually Colonel Watson himself that ferried it to its final, I guess, testing site. So yeah, Roy Brown and then Colonel Watson.
But there's been some German pilot flew there before.
I don't know that we have that information. Right up front. You know, I couldn't say without going through the logbooks, and I honestly didn't prepare for that. I could probably research that, but I don't know. Not a lot though, because you know, it was built in, I think it was like March of '45. You know, yeah. So I mean, it was in service a very short time before the war ended. So, and then it didn't fly very much with the Air Force after the war. So really, it's a pretty low time airframe. Yeah. All the way in the back, standing up.
You mentioned that you found some French marking, French handwriting. Were these built by prisoners, or what? Do you know why there is French rather than German?
Yeah, that's a great question, and no, we don't know that. And that's kind of what I alluded to earlier, is that finding French handwriting in there to somebody on the next shift that presumably also speaks French, it kind of creates some question rather than answers, really, and just kind of adds to the history of the airplane.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll let Tim answer that too.
Yeah, there's definitely other languages marked throughout the aircraft too. It obviously, part of it was some sort of forced labor.
Right here, the black guy. Yeah, I have to imagine that it would, because just the weight of the gun is pretty intense. So one thing you'll notice in this picture right here is the nose gear strut. So that's the camera version. So presumably it has the cameras in it up front rather than 4 Mark 108 cannons. And just compare the length of that nose strut to the length of this nose strut. So that might give you an idea of the difference between the weight there. Yeah. So yeah, probably flying it. Yeah, like, well, let's repeat that, but the CG range is what it is. You can't operate it outside of that CG range. But I'm sure that there were differences.
Yeah, just saying, if you take the guns out, it really doesn't make the plane any lighter. You got to put lead boxes in there or something to make up the weight. So, but yeah, I'm sure just a lump here and there isn't going to affect it too bad. I would imagine.
With camera over here.
So after you in flight, hopefully soon, this guy is so unique. What would be the economic of not having a pilot one night in the
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I was wondering, I noticed here that the Volvo unannounced the 13 does never flow because it's so unique. And you plan to use on fly, that'd be the thing.
So the question was that the museum, Flying Heritage, we currently don't fly our Focke-Wulf 190 D13 because of the uniqueness of it, and that's what we've maintained. And it's the same with the Oscar that we have there, the Japanese Oscar. So that begs the question, like with this airplane, this is obviously very unique, as Adrian was mentioning earlier, and we're going to fly it. So the question is, do we plan on making the D-13 flyable? The answer is no, not at this time. The D-13, at the time we purchased it, and as we purchased it, was very rare, and it was restored to a running condition, but it wasn't restored to the extent that this aircraft was restored to, and it wasn't restored to the extent as the Focke-Wulf 198 that we have as well. So if someday we were to restore it and make it as reliable to give us the confidence that it would be safe to do so, it might be a different story. But at that time, the decision was made not to fly it, so we currently don't, and I don't believe that we will. Yes, sir.
Follow-up, kind of related to that question. Will there be public flights?
Yeah, so the test flight program, that's all kind of going to be determined. It just depends on how it goes. At the end of the day, it's safety first. And so it depends on how the airplane performs, for one. And for two, we have the FAA to work with as well. As you know, there's limitations to experimental aircraft and especially jet-powered experimental aircraft as to flying over populated areas. And there's been a lot of growth around Payne Field. So we don't know what, if any, restrictions will be put on there, and it's just too early to say what's going to happen in that regard. But you know us, we'll do as absolute much as we can, and we'll just have to see what happens. So, yes.
Steve, you said you flew the replica briefly. Do you anticipate that the real plane being
Well, I'll tell you a little story. I first flew one of those replica Focke-Wulfs, and you read the history books what a great airplane Focke-Wulf was, and it set milestones and caused a lot of change. And I flew that, and it was just kind of, it just flies okay, but there's nothing special about it. So when I flew the real Focke-Wulf, I was expecting that, but no, that real Focke-Wulf definitely fit what the book talks about. It was an amazing flying airplane, real light on the controls, fast, everything that I hoped the other one was. So flying the replica 262, it's a jet, and yes, it goes fast, but it had some very unusual handling characteristics, I was told. And when I flew it, I could feel, it's unusual. So I'm hoping this proves it wrong. So this is a real one. If you walk around this and see the workmanship, just look down the ailerons, how nice the gap is on the ailerons. It's straight, the elevator gaps, everything is nice and sealed versus the replica where it does look like a home build. So I'm thinking, no offense, but the wing slats on this work like an F-86, right? An F-86 works like this, where you can slide them back and forth without them being, one unit. The replica is like an A4. They're just a solid slat that slams back and forth. So I think that's probably got a lot to do with how it's going to fly. So hope if I ever give you a report that I can back that up.
Are there any living pilots who flew the original 262? Yeah, Roy Brown. Yes.
What has been your favorite one to fly?
It took me a long time to put that up right now. No question, no second place either. Well, Mr. Maloney collected this airplane, like he said, in the early 50s. Mr. Maloney was a collector. He just loved these airplanes. But he realized that Paul Allen would have a chance to make this thing fly. And Paul Allen would do a good job. So that was really one of the big deciding factors. But unfortunately, Mr. Maloney passed away several years ago, and he would be here right now.
Did you make changes to the landing gear? I understand the nose wheel is weak and side load, and there's no down locks on the main gear, the real one.
No, there's down locks on the main gear. And the nose gear is weak. It says don't tow by the nose gear, but I can tell you that Plains of Fame, we towed it by the nose gear all the time. But yeah, you know, one thing, there's no nose wheel steering, so you got to use brakes and you put side loads on. You just got to be gentle with it.
In the back.
What's the history of this engine that's disassembled and looks like an original? And number two, because of the jet fuel that the Germans use, do you have to make any accommodations for the rebuild engines, or does it run on Jet A?
Well, to take your second question first, you know, jets will run on peanut oil. They'll run on just about anything. But these actually were, the Germans didn't use petroleum kerosene. They used coal, a synthetic type of blend they call J2. But these have been trimmed in the test stand to run on Jet A mixed with gas. So it'd be similar to J2.
And no particular history on the engine. It's just one of several we collected to be able to facilitate having operable Jumos. We have several more. It was just a really good display piece, and we just wanted to take the compressor half off so you guys could see the inside. The whole compressor section is just beautiful. It's original as is. It's really perfectly balanced. It's like Steve mentioned earlier, Aero Turbine was really impressed with the engine itself, with the design and the way it works and kind of held up. So that's all the engine is, just a display engine. And then two over from you with the glasses. Go ahead.
By the way, the X1 had the same trouble with the trim cap being too sensitive. My question was, did this have compressibility problems?
They all do. Yeah. But it's, you know, at any speed, a subsonic airplane has problems. But based on what we read, you know, it's probably around 0.82, something like that, I guess. Which is still pretty fast.
Go ahead. After a 19-year restoration, we're hesitant to throw any dates out. It's bad juju. We'll perform test flights when the airplane's ready, and depending on how the test flight program goes, just kind of determines what happens after that. So it's really kind of an unknown at this time, unfortunately. Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet, who hasn't had a chance? Okay, we'll go up front, and then you'll be next. Go ahead. Did you have a question, or were you just okay?
So the airplane was in a reconnaissance configuration.
Yes.
Hi there.
Yeah, and they were vertical cameras, so they face down, and you can find that in a lot of the publications. So the whole nose was different from this bulkhead on, and you can't really determine by looking at this nose where the cameras were mounted because the structure was different. It was different inside to hold the cameras. So it's not something that I can visually translate for you here. But you'll notice on this airplane the screw holes just aft of the gun nose. That's where that the bulge was to accommodate the camera. And it's in that aircraft that's on the slide. You see that kind of hump there. So yeah, the entire nose section as an assembly was pulled off. So as far as the bracketry and where they were at, we don't have the camera nose, so I couldn't really answer that. Yeah, that's what I understand.
Yeah, obviously this is nearing completion. Is this approximately how far it was when Mr. Allen passed away? Did you get to see it looking this good?
Minus the engines. Yeah, we've just recently come across the engines, but he saw it pretty far along and was absolutely thrilled. You you've got, anybody who hasn't got to ask a question yet, go ahead. Oh, sorry. It's okay.
Is there any literature or original drawings or notes from scientists and engineers that looked at this originally that they were looking at the great white shark? Because the fuselage
Yeah.
form and the aerodynamics and all those factors that come into something that takes its thrust. It's like, look, I think look here. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing airplane, and the design is just beautiful, and it's sleek. And but no, there's no literature on what they were thinking. You know, it's kind of my thought that the mentality that the Germans had was you know, a little bit aggressive. You can see that in their airplanes and their designs, and it is great. I mean, it has character. So it just depends on who's looking at it, right? It's like you see a great white shark, and I see a great white shark that maybe has a smile. So he might be friendly. And if you ask my wife, she'll say it looks like a flying pickle. So it just depends on who's looking at it. Oh yeah, go ahead.
The prototype 262 flew with a prop engine, you know, it was a tail dragger. Another fish story I'll tell you too. You know, the 109s look like a trout, don't they? The way they're camouflaged. So I look up, the world record trout was caught in 1939 in Germany. So I bet you the counselor of camouflage was probably a fisher.
We had somebody in the back, all the way in the back with the hand here. Go ahead.
What's the story with the Heinkel 111 behind us?
So with the glasses, just ahead of that. I'm serious. It's the story is there it is, and you're welcome. So, go ahead.
I've never seen the red oxide on the shell eject chutes. What's the story behind that?
I'll let Tim take that one.
Just pretty much all of the steel parts of the aircraft are always done with the red oxide, whether they were painted with another color later or not. Yeah.
Thank you.
We just kept it with the red oxide.
It was pretty standard German. The armor is the same way. Anything steel, same materials with the armor, you'll see the same color. Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet before I move on to the second? Yes, ma'am. Oh, the same way. They just, so the question was, how did the Germans build the transition duct that I'd shown in the slides? And it was the same way. They had special tooling that would form those, probably maybe in a slightly different process, like maybe they did it all at once. But they were geared up to make several of them. So they just had the right tooling to do it, the right machinery, and then welded it. It was the type of material that they used that was the failing point. Say again, I'm sorry? No, they didn't have any computers to measure it, and that's, as both these guys know as restorers, one of the amazing things about the entire Flying Heritage and Combat Armor Museum barn down there. All of the airplanes that are amazing and unique in design, whether they're made out of metal or wood or part steel, or like the IL-2 is like tank armor. You know, all of those airplanes were designed without computers, without the aid of technology. It was pencils and slide rules, so to speak. And it's just one of the absolutely amazing things, and one of the things that all really respected and thought was just fascinating. That's sort of what our museum was founded on, was the technology jump, and what this group, I guess I say group, I mean designers worldwide, were able to accomplish in a very short time during World War II. We went from flying rag-covered biplanes to this jet in the matter of a decade. It was simply amazing, without computers. Yes, sir?
This lady has a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you have your hand up and I missed you?
I didn't wave, so I should wave. I'm a mom, so I have a safety question.
Yes.
Did the original aircraft have an ejection seat, and will this one have?
No and no. Good question, though. Yes, sir. The question was, how do we decide on the color of the paint job? And the answer is that photo right there. That's this airplane. In the back, black shirt. Go ahead.
What other modifications is there requiring for airworthiness for the aircraft?
No modifications. No. Yeah, it's original. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you have any original pre-flight instruction how to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let Steve talk to that.
You know, the Air Force, well, the German translated material, and then the Air Force Air Intelligence Command, you know, documents, and now that we have experience with it too, so it's, there's a lot of information there.
Yes, ma'am.
Those that are attending today, will you be giving any announcements to us to let us know if you're doing the testing in your venue, or just so we have this availability?
So the question was for those in attendance, will there be any announcing on test flight or progress? Unfortunately, no. It's kind of at the beginning. What I was trying to explain is that this is the sneak peek. This is the closest anybody's going to get to the airplane until it's on display. And as far as like announcements and the progress, I'd have to say you just have to tune into our website and Facebook page, and we'll give you updates as it transpires. But there's, as far as just kind of the flow of the restoration test flights, it's, you know, we do things when we're ready to do them, so it's hard to predict and announce. And what we do, we're going to announce and share with everybody, with the whole public, you know. So this is your time right here today. So we're getting into some repeat questions, I think. So we'll take just a couple more, and then we'll open it up for photos. Go ahead. Well, the next move will be to Moses Lake, and it'll be by truck. So we'll disassemble it and then truck it over there, reassemble it, and then be ready to go. Yeah, in the back.
My yard needs mowing. Can I borrow one of the starter engines off there? Great job, guys. Beautiful. What's that?
You want to borrow your lawnmower?
Yeah, right.
Yes, sir.
Well, the slats are aerodynamic. They just, angle of attack dictates what they do. They just slop in and out. So you can be, when you're slow, they're out. Angle of attack, if you're going 300 knots and you pull a bunch of G's, and angle of attack, they'll kind of come out to whatever. They're aerodynamic. And the flaps are selected hydraulically. You can just select, you know, any position. In the F-86, for instance, when you're really starting it around or doing aerobatics, or sometimes they slam and bang, and you know, you hear all these noises sometimes. It's just the slats, and they're just on their own out there.
All the way in the back.
You take it apart and put it in a truck to take to Moses Lake. How long does it take you to take it apart and put it back together again?
We'll let you know. There's a lot of cotter pins. Well, if you read the history books, absolutely, you know, the Germans had a lot of advanced design that was taken advantage of. It's said that the 60 guys detected the information from the first flight radar, and came up with a third flight radar that started winning.
Yeah, the question was, would we fire up one of the starter motors, the lawnmower engines? It's really loud, like really loud. So I don't know if that's such a swell idea. So.
We can't hear it anyway.
What's that? Yeah, I think probably not. Just well, for one, we're still kind of in the test phase and getting it sorted out. And maybe if we were outside and prepared for it and were able to offer earplugs, because I mean, quite honestly, you think lawnmower engine and it sounds like it's kind of benign, like, oh, how loud could a lawnmower engine be? And the answer is like really loud. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. Okay, well, it looks like we've answered everybody's questions. So this time we'll go ahead and hang on we go. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I think it's about 1,600 PSI. Yeah, it's in different yeah. So we'll go ahead and open it up. Steve and Tim and I will be around. The mechanics we introduced earlier are here, so they're fair game to tackle them if you want to answer, get questions answered.